Hi guys, welcome back to chapter 15. Today we're going to be going over speaking to persuade. So mainly we're going to be going over ethos, logos, and pathos and how those play into the group project. So as you guys know, this group project is more so about persuasion. And as I keep referencing as a prompt, this is going to be a pitch. So say Texas State hired all of you guys as a team um, to work and each of you are tackling a problem at Texas State. This assignment is trying to get you to find a problem within the area that you were assigned, pitch it to Texas State and hopefully get it approved. Think of it as writing a grant or um, Shark Tank, Think of it like that. So persuasion specifically is the process of attempting to change or reinforce a listener's attitudes, beliefs, values, and or behaviors. And so the persuasive speaker will invite the listener to make a choice rather than just offering information. And so as you guys remember in the informative speech, that was more about just, point blank, this is how it is, just teaching us and educating us about a certain topic. Instead, now we are wanting the group assignment is asking you to persuade, in this case, I guess it would be me, that your not only that your problem exists, but that your solution is viable. And so if you take away choice, it becomes coercion, and that's using force to get another person to think or behave as you'd like. Coercion is unethical just because it does take away free choice. And to avoid doing that, you should provide options and avoid threats. Um, I will say though that threats don't scare me, so if you're ready, let's post up. Otherwise, going back to, if you guys remember the onion model, it's important to understand what the goal of your speech, of your group presentation is supposed to be. So for example, are you targeting an attitude? Are you targeting a belief? Are you targeting a value? Depending on which one you're targeting, you have to know how hard is it going to be to convince them of an issue. So for example, um, going back to the parking issue at Texas State, that would more so be along the lines of a belief or an attitude, because it would be much easier to convince someone that there is a parking issue at Texas State in terms of space, versus trying to convince someone that Texas State sucks as a school. Does that make sense? That would be much easier to change. So behind the psychology of persuasion, um, some researchers suggest motivating with dissonance. And so if you guys have never heard of this before, cognitive dissonance occurs when you are presented with information that is inconsistent with your current attitudes, beliefs, feelings, values, needs, all of those fun things. And one important part, if you're going to create cognitive dissonance, is that you help reduce it after you created it. So, for example, again, going back to the parking um, topic, you would be like, have you ever had a hard time parking before you coming to school? Are you sitting there looking for parking spots? I sure have. And then that kind of gets the audience to start thinking, like, I have too. Like, that's kind of weird. It's weird that all of us have had issues parking, versus the elaboration likelihood model is more of a direct and indirect using peripheral processing. And so that would be more so if you physically took people out and were like, wow, it's weird that we don't have any parking spots, right? And, people start looking around and they're like, yeah, like there's a lot, but all of them are taken. Um, and you can even go back and use like statistical information, such as um, according to Texas State, there's over 40,000 students, but there's only about 5,000 parking spots. Obviously, there's an imbalance there. All right. And so Aristotle, if you guys have ever, um, I don't know how much they go over this in other classes and in high school anymore, but this is like a really, I guess not really old, but a rhetoric based theorist, and he suggests that there are three powerful means of persuasion. And so there's ethos, and that's credibility. There's logic, or there's logos, which is logic, and then pathos is emotions. And arguably, the best persuasive practices happen when you use all three at the right moment, because if you're only using one, you can only persuade a person who follows that logic. So for example, if you're trying to convince someone, um, if you're trying to convince someone who uses pathos as how they determine their choices, using ethos is not going to change anything. So ideally, you want to incorporate these three within your speech as you're creating it. And so starting off, how do you use ethos? So credibility is an audience's perception of a speaker's competence, trustworthiness, and dynamism. So competence is the perception of being capable in their skills. Trustworthiness is the perception of trustworthiness, deserving trust. I hope you guys know what trustworthiness means. And then dynamism is the perception of being vigorously involved and progressing and continuously adapting. So being able to complete the task at hand. And then charisma is the perception of being attractive. And some individuals would kind of argue on what charisma will look like practically, whether it's the physical attraction or whether it is the way someone speaks or anything along those lines. And then enhancing your credibility, there's three different times to do it. So there's the initial credibility, which will be before the presentation. And that can be whether you're going around and talking to people in the audience about things, or this could even be how you look. I do hate professionalism, but everyone is going. Society has taught us that people who dress up are more deserving of our trust. It can even be the way you build it up in the introduction. And then derived credibility is using credibility during your speech. So when you're bringing up your sources and you're citing your material and you're going back to evidence, that will be derived credibility. And then there's terminal credibility, which will be after the presentation. And so this can be, how you walk away. Do you interact with people afterwards? Are you able to answer questions? Various things along that line. And then how do you organize an argument? And so this will be the format that your group presentation will follow. If you guys kind of notice, this is the Monroe's motivated sequence, which is targeting how to best motivate an audience into changing their behavior. So basically the best way to be persuasive. Starting off, you'll get the attention and you'll do the introduction. Then in the second one, you will introduce the need. So this is the problem, main point one. This is where you'll define what the issue is, prove that, showcase your evidence, really tell us about what the problem is. Satisfaction would be your solution or your plan, or your main point two, where you go in and you talk about what does your solution look like, what are the parameters of it, how does it work, what does the evidence look like, and then the visualization would be the world picture of the future, which is your main point three. So what does it look like? What would it look like if we did choose your solution? What would it look like if we didn't choose your solution? And then lastly is going to be action. So what does the audience need to do for the conclusion? And this should all sound a bit familiar. This is essentially the Dewey problem solving report, but put in outline form for you to streamline that information. And so using reasons and evidence. So in order to prove something, you must use evidence and reasoning. So evidence is any material used to support your point or premise, including illustrations, examples, research statistics, opinions, um, which will help the audience reason, which is the process of drawing conclusions from evidence. And essentially, this could be going back to, like I said, according to Texas State, there are over 40,000 students, but there's only 5,000 parking spots. And that evidence will help the audience reason that, oh, yeah, there definitely is a parking issue at Texas State, which builds proof, which is the combination of evidence and reasoning. And so, how does the audience evaluate evidence? So, is it a fact or an opinion? Where does the evidence come from? Does the evidence clearly relate to the claim? Is it current? Is it offered enough? And then how is the evidence interpreted? And so, as you're finding your sources and your research and you're going about picking what's best, these are questions I would really recommend you sit on and think about as you're working through it, um, because you do want to find evidence that will help you make the point you need to make best. And so, how do you use emotions or pathos to persuade? So, pathos, like I said, is an appeal to emotions, helping your audience feel the problem. So, there's two main ways to do this, and you can do this through a fear appeal or you can use a positive appeal. A fear appeal is going to be something more negative along the lines of a threat. If you go back to thinking of coercive power, do not do this. Well, you can do this, but try not to fearmonger. Um, versus a positive appeal is a message promising that good things will happen if the speaker's advice is followed. So, going back to the Texas State parking example, going a fear route would be if we don't get more parking spots, then you're not going to get any parking spots and no one will get parking spots. And then Texas State, no one will want to go to Texas State, so Texas State will fail as a school, but then you'll have a degree from Texas State and it won't mean anything because it doesn't matter, blah, 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 blah. Trying to negatively convince someone versus a positive way would be, okay, if we get more parking spots, then everyone will have an easier time and people will like coming to campus more, um, which will create better group, better community involvement. And so, how do we use pathos? And so, this is finding a way to touch or reveal your audience to you. Reach yourself. Gosh, I can't see behind me. Your audience on an emotional way. So, for example, you can use vivid and descriptive language, emotional evidence, so stories, personal testimonies, dramatic stories, actually, you're not allowed visual aids on the group presentation, but you can describe visual aids. And then emotions are contagious. So if you think about like, I know most of you are freshmen, but you can even think of like back when you were in high school, think about a class you took like your freshman or sophomore year. Probably can't remember much of the concrete information that was given to you, but I'm sure you could remember the stories the teacher told, funny movies or images or book covers that you saw, just because it can be a bit more memorable. So using pathos in your speech can be very helpful. And so, how can you adapt your messages to the audience? And normally, face to face, this would look a bit different, considering you guys would be presenting to a whole class instead of just me. But based on your audience analysis, you have to determine if your audience are they going to be receptive? Are they neutral? Are they unreceptive? For example, you wouldn't go talking about Texas State parking to UT because they're going to be like, what the fuck do we have to do with this? So they're going to be unreceptive to neutral at best, versus talking about that at Texas State students, they're going to be receptive to neutral at best. So it's just understanding what would be based on your audience, how can you alternate your message? And then going back to the principles that we learned earlier this semester, you need to be aware of your communication as you go through, especially as you're in a group. Same thing with verbal and nonverbal messages. You need to be effectively using verbal and nonverbal to be communicating with your group members effectively. And you'll also need to listen and respond thoughtfully to each of them while adapting your communication throughout this project. So I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 15. I hope that this semester is going decent for all of you. For me, it's woof, but I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I hope that we can finish this semester off strong. And I'm rooting for you guys. And if you have any questions, please email me or come visit my student hours on Zoom. I am always there waiting for you guys, and I will see y'all later.